Hi, ladies. Okay, welcome to my first ever fireside chat. It has been on my heart to do this video. I was attempting to explain like where this frequency of allure inhabits in the feminine. Allure, and this is very much in the specific lineage that I have studied and kind of quasi-created about the relationship between allure and the muse. So I have posted, I think, 3 essays that explore this idea of muse consciousness and explores this idea of allure in greater detail. And I still feel like it's ambiguous. And so I wanted to help clarify or provide a distillation about this magnetic quality of the feminine that is exogenous. It is regardless of extrinsic beauty, external beauty, beauty that's sourced in anything other than like our inner internal nature, the truth of our nature. So the way I work with allure is that it is like a magnetic, rarefied feminine essence or feminine frequency. It is defined in some ways differently than how I provided kind of like a dictionary definition of allure, although it also includes some of those features. Allure requires penetrability, energetic and vibrational penetrability on the part of the feminine. I would go further and to say that it requires a certain susceptibility, that we as the feminine in this instance have a certain susceptibility to potent masculine presence, and that susceptibility or that vulnerability is beautiful and rightful and serves us, like serves our own beingness. Allure also requires that we have a profound respect for the masculine, a respect so deep and so anchored in the truth of our being that we are willing to bear our own discomfort in order to honor and venerate that co-creational principle of the masculine. So part of allure, and not in its entirety, part of allure is that we're comfortable in recognizing or remembering the rightful devotional circuitry to men and to the masculine. So many women in our culture, for example, are in profound devotion to the feminine and profound devotion to the goddess. That is beautiful. I include myself in that. And I have a more expanded kind of union template that allows my devotion to really holistically flow towards men and the masculine. Like devotion, it's a very high frequency. And for me, that is a deeply important part of like my template and what I source in my relationships with myself, and then specifically in my erotic romantic relationship and partnership with Max right now. Like he knows me to be highly devotional, and it's important for me to be seen and known and kind of recognized, or seen, I think is a better word, in those devotional activations that live inside of me. For me and my soul essence in this lifetime, I wouldn't die peacefully. I wouldn't die peacefully on my deathbed if I hadn't truly excavated the truth of how deeply those devotional codes nourish me and let me fulfill, again, this is for me, my dharmic destiny, my soul essence gold print in this lifetime as being a deeply feminine essenced woman who allows herself, who has like dismantled all the obstacles and calcifications that let me bear the trembling felt sense and vulnerability of being like, oh my God, it is important to me that I can pour outward my devotion, and that there is a man who can rightfully receive my devotion and kind of be in that energetic circuitry with me. So I'm going to talk now about the dicier oh dear, pieces I shared in last week's transmission, which was about quote unquote softening our competency. That I want to offer a correction for, or an adjustment for. So I want all women to be in profound mastery and their profound brilliance and artistry and command of their craft or their art or their genius, how that genius flows into the world. And there's a way that is often enmeshed or braided with a overdeveloped capacity to quote unquote overfunction, which means that the feminine, women in our world space, in our culture, are deeply rewarded for all the ways that we subtly and overtly like override our own truth, our own gnosis, our own, and I'm going to even say comfort, although this is certainly very privileged, like single moms or even moms of young ones, like this is a very different kind of frame. So I'm going to talk about this for a minute. So I went to college. I went to a college called Bennington College in Vermont. And I had these two best friends, Jennifer and Jessica. It was quite the mouthful. It was Jennifer, Jessica, and Jillian. And Jessica always had this kind of magical quality to her that as an 18 through 21-year-old, I didn't have a name for. I now recognize this as she carried high degrees of allure. And I'm going to tell two stories about Jessica, both of which kind of whacked me, not only in that time, but for years afterwards. Like I would ruminate on those moments and was like, why am I so captivated and activated and triggered by these moments? So the first one was our senior show. We were art majors and I was a sculpture major. I double majored in literature and art. And so I used clay a lot in my sculptures, as did Jessica and Jennifer. So in order to graduate from Bennington, we had to mount and prepare a senior show. And so the senior show required that we use the kiln to fire all of our own ceramic sculptures and pieces, that the ceramic elements that were part of our sculptures. And so it was really grueling. And we were just working so hard on our senior show, up late, night after night after night. And then it came after a big, long, like immersive experience that it was time to load the kiln. And this is a very physical experience. They're like these huge stone labs. It's like exhausting. And we would just be like covered, like we'd go like this in our hair and like little puffs of clay would come out. Like we were just a hot mess and exhausted. And also, despite all the training, like didn't exactly know what we were doing. So it was like 2:00 in the morning and we're like working and we're so tired and we're just like ragdolls at this point. And Jessica, we're almost done. We're like 92% done. Jessie goes, I'm tired. And she just plopped herself right down on a bag of clay and a big poof of clay dust came out. She was like, I just can't do it anymore. And Jennifer is like, oh, Jessie, you're so cute. Like, you're so sweet that you're so tired. And I was like, Jessica, get up. Like, what do you mean you're so tired? Like, I was so mad. And Jennifer's looking at me and she's like, Jillian, my God, she's really tired. And I was like, P.S. Oh my gosh, can you hear it in my voice right now? Like, it still gets me all riled up. I was like, P.S. we are all tired. This is so exhausting and like kind of scary. And like, we don't really, you know, and Jennifer's like, she just needs to take a rest, Jillian. Like, oh my gosh. It was my own internal tyrant and my own internal slave driver, which I was like, Jessica, get up. Like, you need to keep working. You need to keep helping us. And Jennifer, who has a very different internal narrative, was like appalled that I was so like angry about this. And I was so appalled that Jennifer was like so loosey-goosey about this whole situation. So it was like, we have three highly different feminine experiences all happening in kind of this apex of a stressful situation. So that situation resolved, and we fired our clay and we graduated, and we had these smashingly fabulous senior shows. Then I met Jessica's dad at our graduation. And Jessica's father was so, what's the word I'm going to, cherishing of his daughter. He presented her with a Tiffany pearl necklace upon her graduation with a sweet note and like a bouquet of roses. He told her that he was so proud of her that she had this incredible experience that she created for herself, and that she got to experience her creativity. And 4 years of, she's from LA, 4 years of being in college in Vermont. And he just kind of adored her and wasn't like, oh, and you did such a great job with all your, we didn't get grades, but we got comments, but like essentially like, oh, and you did such a good job and I read all your comments. Like, he kind of didn't care. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, I'm like tracking this scent that like something mysterious is afoot, and something very different than my own lived experience, where like, you know, I had this kind of Ivy League father, and I was like pushed in all these ways to like do very well academically. And I practiced gymnastics and swimming. And there was like all this, what I internalized as performance and producing in order to kind of win or earn my father's love. I am not saying that is what was true, but that was my internal lived experience. So this is the second part of Jessica's story. Many years later, we're all living in New York City, in Manhattan. We're like in our mid-20s. And Jessica decides that she wants to work for, she wants to be like a stylist and like an editorial stylist. And she wanted to work for Martha Stewart, because Jessica loved like home decor and decorating and things like that. So we all went on like a mission where we were like, okay, Jessica wants to work for Martha Stewart. And this is how we just all backed each other. But we like all reached out to all our contacts and just reached out to people a little bit uncomfortably to see who did we know at Martha Stewart. And eventually, and I'm not even sure how this happened, Jessica totally got a job being a styling editor at Martha Stewart. And I was working at a startup, and every day at like 5 o'clock or 5:30, Jessica would call me and she'd be like, okay, Jilly, I'm going to go home now. You know, like the Umbrellas of Cherbourg are playing at the West Village, you know, cinema with Catherine Deneuve. And I love Catherine Deneuve. And I was like mad again, because I was like, Jessica, you just got this job. You can't just go home at 5 or 5:30. You have to roll up your sleeves and do the midnight oil. What is that expression? Like roll up the sleeves and do, like you have to work hard. She was like, Jilly, I don't want to work hard. I want to go watch a movie, and then I want to go home and make dinner for Charlie, her boyfriend at the time, who has been her husband this in 15 years later, 20 years later. And I remember just hanging up that phone, and I would work for 4 more hours night after night. And I was like, I can't believe it. She's such a diva. Like, I would just go through all of these judgments. And Jessica has lived an incredibly enchanted life. And it's taken me all these years to recognize that Jessica and the codes that she was blessed with her own father, she stays inside of what feels good to her. She's willing to disappoint other people. She is willing to not get the fancy promotion. She is willing to plop down on a bag of clay at 2 o'clock in the morning to take a little siesta before like we had to finish our project. Those things were so out of range for me. I would rather overfunction, have this internal tyrannical voice inside of me pushing me harder and harder to perform, to produce, to generate in order to, get the thing, have more money, earn the man, get the father's approval, all of these things. I literally calcified and codified in my own feminine being that over-functioning was the way to have. And the cost of that to my life and to my being has been profound. It has been one of the deepest unwindings of my life, is to let myself like draw way back from that over-functioning in order to like reorient a set point. And I will say, the more I have drawn back from over-functioning and let myself be seen and felt and even mortified by my own lack of capacity to push through something, the more just vibrationally, organically, the allure has become kind of aroused or activated in my own system. And I found, this is subjective, my own lived experience, that the more that I withdrew those templates of over-functioning, the more that the external masculine, AKA men, would rise up in the world to support me or to celebrate me or to help me, let's say. So for me, and this is the deep correction I want to make, it is not your competency. It is the places in you that use your capacity to overfunction. We use it transactionally to overfunction, to get love, to feel our self-worth, to feel our value. And that cannot coexist with a magnetic, organically magnetic, alluring frequency. So that is the part that needs to be dismantled and kind of like slowly like liquefied, so that we can live in harmony and in attunement with our own body, our own edges of, oh, that doesn't feel good to me. This almost makes us like, what is the word? Like a pariah or something in our culture. For example, our cycles, for those of us that bleed, or those of us that did bleed, which is all of us, it's like those first few days, it's like to have to be yang and moving through the world so quickly. It's like, oh my God, it's a little bit devastating. But to truly say, I have to cancel everything today. It's the first day of my bleed. It's the first day of my moon, is like revolutionary. It's an incredible thing for women to model with one another, but there's no place for it in our world. So this idea of over-functioning and trespassing beyond our own capacity, trespassing beyond actually what feels good in our body, at the risk, and this is where Jessica has been a glorious teacher for me. I have like praised her and thanked her for teaching me through contrast the beauty of what it is like when a woman can hold herself, regardless, as I said, of inconvenience to others, regardless of disappointing others potentially, because it's her truth. It's like, it's true for her. So I have been so blessed to have had this early imprint, well, not as early as Jessica, who seemed to have had like a nest in her life I think headed by her father in terms of like her feminine essence being so truly cherished. That is a rare and precious thing. I have actually thanked her father for gifting her this experience, because then she's gone on and kind of imprinted her inner world space. Like, we know this about Jessica and we cherish this about her because she's our teacher in so many ways. So the deeper harmonic, the deeper truth here, and this is the invitation, is like, where are you over functioning? With small ones, this is going to be tricky. For moms of young ones, it's like over functioning is the name of the game in so many ways. So it's like, oh, how can you bring in more support or more nourishing, and not in a doing way or adding layers of complexity, but that just let you rest in your beingness. Every once, I know these are like the mamas that are like, Jillian, I can't even pee with the door closed. But just to see, like, is there a tiny little sip of where there's spaciousness possible for you, or ease possible for you? So how does this relate to allure? So allure is a very specific, it's so tricky. It's like, for all the work I've done on allure, it's still tricky to define. It's like a rarefied tone of magnetism. It cannot occupy the same space as overfunctioning. The overfunctioning feminine destroys her allure. This is the piece. When we don't let ourselves be penetrable, when we don't stay with our own truth and just allow ourselves to feel it, first of all, numbness. It's like, if we can't, I couldn't even feel sometimes my exhaustion or my anxiety or my fear or my like trying to getness. All of those things, it's like deadening to allure. It's not even deadening. Yeah, deadening. And so as I said, withdrew from these archaic feminine templates of overfunctioning, I started to have a different experience. I had to give a name to this experience. And I was like, oh, this is developing allure. And as I began to develop allure, it's not even develop, it's like become familiar with those parts of myself that naturally are alluring. As I said, my world began to change, because allure is an invocation to the masculine. Women that are willing to be vulnerable by letting themselves experience and be seen in their allure are very are very kind of precious. They're like treasures for the masculine, because that is the way that the masculine gets to be of service, gets to fulfill part of his purpose. So when I tell stories of like, I just stand by the door and I feel so vulnerable and so awkward, this is just like at busy, like let's say office buildings in New York City, until a man would come and open the door. It's like I was doing this to be in service to him, because he got to fulfill part of his own template. Like, we can call it the very old-fashioned word, chivalry, or being in service to the feminine. I'm a little careful around that one, because there's some misuse of that in the collective kind of masculine feminine world space or culture. So it's like I was willing to be vulnerable and penetrable and be of service to the masculine by letting him fulfill his own soul essence dharma. And it sounds ridiculous. It's about opening a door. I can open the door. I can do all the things I choose not to do. I'm going to say that again. I can do all the things I choose not to do. And I don't do it to play a game. It's not to be manipulative. It's to stay in the truth of my own, like choosing to feel good rather than doing more. Choosing to feel good rather than doing more. Said differently, choosing to rejoice in my feminine rather than migrating to my masculine aspect to perform, to produce, to generate. And this is the stuff of like, not revolution, but like it is a deeply activating feminine presence and feminine frequency. So I wanted to share a bit more about this. I'll give one more example. Years ago, same, when I was living in New York City, that's where I spent most of my kind of formidable 20s and 30s and even, 20s and 30s. I lived in a 5th floor walk up at Union Square, and it was quite a beautiful apartment, hardwood floors, high ceilings, but it was only a 1-bedroom apartment, 1-bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and living room. Fireplace, like quite lovely. And I studied feng shui for many years. Feng shui is, I think in Vedic culture, it may be called vastu. It's like the art of how you place objects, or you kind of code your home to support your desires and your intentions in the world. So I studied, and feng shui is Chinese. I studied feng shui for many years. And somehow, I mean, I had like an okay job, but I didn't, like I was quasi, not quite struggling, but like not in bountiful economic reality, like living in Manhattan in my 20s. But somehow I hired our teacher. We had like a fancy teacher. She's written books, all the things. And she like schlepped up these 4 flights of stairs, and she got to my apartment and she like looked around. And that's when I realized, or she even said, like, she's used to going to very fancy, posh, like luxurious apartments on 5th Avenue and Park Avenue and Madison Avenue. And here she is at this like, 20 something, like 1-bedroom, but, like not super fancy at all. And so she was like, oh, we're going to feng shui this space. And I was like, oh, like that's kind of when I realized. And I was like, yes. And so we went around and she asked me many questions and she was very gracious, but she's fancy. And she gives me 2 missions. I shared with her that I was really ready to like attract a partner, like my partner. And she was like, okay, and there's 2 ways that we can code your home. This is not her languaging at all. So that energetically, like we're making space for him. And I was like, okay. And she was like, one is in your medicine cabinet, you have to leave half of the medicine cabinet empty so that it's like you're literally leaving space for his presence. Like you're leaving space for his shaving cream and his razors. I mean, I'm like giving very conventional, but like masculine toiletries. And I was like, half? Because it's like space is such a premium in New York City. And so all of a sudden she's telling me I have to have like half my medicine cabinet. And I was like, he's a dude. He's not going to have that much stuff. And she was like, half. She's like, this is a partnership. And I was like, oh, okay. So like I stashed stuff in, I don't know, different places, but it was like awkward. And then the real doozy, she comes into my small closet and she was like, half. And I was like, oh my God. I was, I'm like a woman who has no shortage of clothes and shoes and products for her, medicine cabinet. And now she's like and I was like, half, like it's one thing in a medicine cabinet, it's another thing in a closet. And I was like, he doesn't wear suits. Like he's more casual. Like he's not going to have a lot of clothing that he needs to hang in the closet. She was like, it's energetic, Jillian. This is your partner. And I was like, oh yeah, she just said that about the medicine cabinet, but it was so rough. Like I was, then it got really awkward. Like I had to it just was like, I even to get like one of those things on wheels, like with the bar, like none of this was working out so hot for me. But it taught me something so important, because every day I'd open the medicine cabinet and I'd see those naked shelves. And I was like, oh, he's coming. Like one day I'm going to open this medicine cabinet and there's going to be like dude items in there. That's so hot. So every day, twice a day, when I would get ready in the morning to go to work, and at night when I'd like do my nighttime skincare regimen, I was like, see those naked shelves, and I would feel my longing and my like willingness to be energetically penetrated by his presence before it was even there. This will relate in just a moment. And then I'd like go into my closet. It's like a little awkward, but I'd see those naked empty shelves and I was like, oh, like it felt so good to be like literally holding his place, like with honor and reverence. So what she taught me in those feng shui, this metaphor here that I'm going to kind of use is like, we have to make space for our men. We have to make space for the masculine. So sure, this is a physicalized metaphor of this story, but it works the same in the energetics around Allure. We have to make space in our beingness, in our behavior, in our affect, all those things that we cultivate egoically in our lives in order to survive/thrive in this world. We have to like soften those structures to make space for him, to make space for his direction, his guidance, his leadership, his correction, his adjustments, his beautiful generosity and pouring into us, his support, his provision, his providership. All of these things we have to make space for. And the way that we make space is that we let ourselves, oops, some kind of strange alert. It's like we let go of something. We let go of the mine or the rightness or the codification of like, I can do it. It's like we have to release and let go our over-functioning in order to let our own emanation magnetize him and receive him. And receive him in his fullness. And one of the outcomes, or like, I'd say outcomes, is that in doing so, we activate our own allure. The masculine cannot create allure in a woman. It is a woman's sovereign choice that she will either remember, create, cultivate, play with, arouse her own allure. And then what happens is, and this is what I've said a few times, it's like, I promise you, and this is a tricky one to explain, but it's like, then our frequency or like our field starts doing some of the work for us. So I think I said this in one of the essays. It's like Allure, and this is just energetic, and this is quite likely subjective, although this has reproducible results. When a woman is willing to activate or let herself feel and be seen in her allure, it's like her field, her own kind of auric field, or her own feminine frequency, it's like begins to do some of the work that normally her personality and her ego structure and her characterology and all these things that are also part of the human experience have to do the heavy lifting of. It's like instead of competing, she's enchanting. Instead of competing with him, oh, I can do it, she's enchanting him, not as a form of manipulation, but because that's the energetic, organic expression of allure, is enchantment. And our world is like starving for enchantment. I've shared that quote in last week's transmission. I said, by Carl Jung, enchantment is the oldest form of medicine. He is referring to, kind of multifaceted enchantment. But inside of a woman, that emanation, that signal, that willingness to be penetrated by our own allure, instead of banishing it, because we think that if we banish our allure, we'll be safer. But it couldn't be further from the truth. The more we banish our allure, we literally, and I said this in an essay, we render ourselves unfeelable. That is a more dangerous state of being, both for her own kind of eros, as well as in the world. Okay, this is feeling complete. I always think I'm gonna do these fast, and then there's complexity. So I understand that we could hold a frame around this and be like, Jillian, over-functioning, the stories that you told, over-functioning isn't, the opposite of over-functioning isn't allure. That's true. The opposite of over-functioning is not allure. But allure and over-functioning cannot coexist at the same time in the same woman. We have to choose. So this is not about collapsing into helplessness. This is not about collapsing into damsel. This is about living in attunement with the truth of where are we starting to go into over functioning, because we think that's where we get our value. Because that is a distortion. And if we're living inside of that, first of all, it's exhausting and wearying and depleting to the feminine soul and the feminine body. Second of all, it's so disrespectful, not only to ourselves, but to the masculine, because we're leaving no space for him. Instead of, like I said, in my closet and in my medicine cabinet, which turned into highly erotically charged fields for me. Because it's I was already letting him penetrate me. So it's the same thing. It's where can we let him penetrate us with his full masculine light, let's say. It's the same thing in life, or the cosmic cock. Where can we let ourselves be penetrated? Because if we're over functioning and armoring behind I can do everything, it's then we're living inside of an impenetrable armored distortion in service to, or let me say it differently, not in service to life. So this is a complex piece. levels to this and layers to this, as I always say. But the deep correction here that I really, and I'm ending with this, is it's not about softening your competency. It's about unfurling and undoing the places where you abandon your own self by overfunctioning because you think that that's the way you get love or you get to be valuable. And that is literally the kiss of death to Allure, which will be in much higher service to your own expression, your own truth, to him, your partners, and truly like to life itself. Okay, let me know if there's questions. I'm going to attempt to post this now. Sending love. So excited to be with all of you tomorrow.